welcome to my podcast where I invite you to run with me after memories and shape them into stories. On this show, I'll also share samples of my writing and interesting moments from everyday life. I'm your host, rooroosig, and you're listening to my podcast, The Story Chaser. Welcome back, dear listeners. It has been months and months, I think 5, since I recorded my last episode. I had a really busy winter season with this business that I started, and Christmas was super crazy, and so I didn't have time for my show, but now I am back, and that's the explanation there. I don't really want to go into a whole thing talking about where I've been. I want to talk about where I'm at now, and right off the bat, I want to dedicate this returning episode to my friend Duff, who is starting his writing journey. And I want to wish him all the best and just say, buckle up, dude. You're going on a ride. So I think that's pretty cool. Tonight, I am talking to myself. Yep. This is something that I've done my whole life, and I used to hide it. I would only do it when I was certain no one else could see me. And then the development of Bluetooth technology came along, which was a godsend for me. Because in the beginning, I didn't even have a device, but I would place something like a button or a small knob in my ear and pretend I was having a conversation with someone else besides myself. Many times, driving around, just hitting buttons on my radio of the dashboard, pretending to be on a call, but really talking to myself. And I've grown now, I've aged, I'm old, and I don't care anymore how it looks. Talking to myself is something I do out in the open. I walk around and I talk to myself because it's part of my writing process. I need to hear something before I can give it a place on paper. It's that simple. Any other creatives talking to themselves out there? I'd love to hear about it. I'd love for you to call the podcast phone and tell me about it, but Google took my phone number away. So not cool, Google, whatever. But I still have an email, and that is rooroosig@gmail.com. Write in and tell me about talking to yourself or any unusual creative process you have. I'd love to hear it. I'm going to jump right into tonight's piece of shared writing. And for now, the title is That Day. That day. The afternoon sun hinted at the approaching summer. It was warm enough to walk outside without a jacket, but one step into a shaded area reminded me it was still spring in Chicago. I crossed Van Buren Street, clutching my mesh trading jacket closed, and dodged moving cars with lightning between my feet. Nothing on my body shook or wiggled when I ran. My estrogen and collagen were in their original places. Most days, I didn't even need makeup to highlight features that shined on their own. My metabolism was a finely tuned machine. I ate whatever I wanted, and it fell from my slight frame within a few hours. I did not shy away from my reflection. Instead, I held my image responsible for maintaining a perfectly shaped ass in every storefront window I passed, and I constantly checked my outfit. In between introspective ideas and how the world worked, I focused on details like the guy I dated that month and the number of days left until the weekend started. I was 25 years old, working in one of the biggest financial exchanges in the world in downtown Chicago, and my life was brilliantly electric. Bike messengers zoomed past. Their bells rang while taxis honked excessively to be seen. Suits Dresses, overalls splattered with paint, guitar cases, and backpacks blended together. The streets were one constant rapid scene in pursuit of success. Downtown, everyone was always on their way somewhere. This included homeless people. They hustled and bustled amongst the professional men and women on the city streets. Instead of briefcases, they pushed shopping carts filled with clanking bottles, plastic bags, blankets, and newspapers. Some talked to themselves, but out loud for all of us to hear, sharing every thought that entered their mind, no matter how provocative. And they caught the attention of my childish heart, which believed in the good of all people. I went through a phase I called double lunch. This meant that I bought 2 of whatever lunch I had that day. One I would eat, and the other I would give to one of the many homeless people in the area. I was naive to a degree until that day. That day of the nameless man I met once and never forgot. My lunch break was really only about 20 minutes to a half an hour long. There were fantastic lunch options in the immediate area. On any day, with a hop, skip, and a jump, I could have a Berghoff's corned beef sandwich stacked 6 inches high with a glass bottle of the smoothest root beer I had ever tasted. Or a tender pulled pork from Pogue Mahone's Irish Bar, a joint that was just fun to say. There was also Ceres, where one would go to drink lunch, and it was the place where a person walked into but definitely crawled out of because they had the heaviest pours in the city. If I wanted a burger, then Pepper's was the place. And man, we all loved Pepper's. It was this greasy, hole-in-the-wall joint down the street from the Board of Trade. Pepper's didn't do any fancy stuff like infuse oil and grace burgers with a truffle mayo. They made a simple double cheeseburger, tucked a jalapeno pepper under the bottom patty, wrapped it in foil paper, and sent you on your way. And the line was always out the door. That day, I chose the pizza place down the street, and can you believe I cannot remember the name of it? Anyway, they sold these giant slices, and I pointed out 2 from under the heat lamp, and within a few minutes was back outside, balancing 2 cardboard triangles in my left hand, and sipped a wild cherry Pepsi from my right. I loved eating in the small garden, outlined in marble ledges next to the train station, where LaSalle Street crossed with Van Buren. At any point in the day, it was a nice sitting area for folks waiting for a train and trading floor employees to soak up a few minutes of vitamin D away from the noise of open outcry. I hoisted myself up on one of the higher ledges, lined with tulips that faced the street, and let my feet dangle while I opened one box. The corners were now soaked with grease. As I took a bite of my slice, I scanned the passing walkers and hoped to find my lucky double lunch recipient of that day. A man approached me and hopped himself up beside me. He placed his hands on his knees and swung his legs. "Nice day, isn't it?" he said, with an off-putting enthusiasm. I nodded yes. My peripheral vision caught his black hoodie, oversized white t-shirt, gray sweats, and fairly clean gym shoes. Slightly outgrown hair covered the tops of his ears, and stubble shaded his face. His clothes, rather than smelling of stale piss or typical body odor, carried a delicate scent of fabric softener in the breeze. I drummed my fingers on the extra triangle, unsure if I should give it to the man, gripping the ledge, his head now tilted back in the sunlight. I wondered, is this dude homeless, or did he just wander outside to sunbathe for a bit? My pizza offer could have actually insulted him, but I slid it towards him, letting it touch his hip. He looked down. It's extra if you want it, I whispered, lacking confidence. He tore open the box, pulled the slice out, and took a bite right away. Thank you, he muffled through his mouth full of pizza. Okay, so he was starved. Was it wrong that I was relieved by that? After eating almost the whole slice in just a few bites, he, as casually as someone who opens the door for another at a gas station, offered this enormous piece of information. I used to own a restaurant, but I lost it, he said. Having finished my bite, I crumpled my napkin and held it to my mouth. I took a long pull from my straw, pretending it was the pizza that I was struggling to swallow, rather than his disheartening struggle, as I held my hand across the bottom of my throat. Recently? I asked, truly curious, and also trying to figure out how new he was to street life, if that was his life. So many things were still a mystery, despite the abrupt announcement. It had been going on for some time, he replied, as he gazed at the buildings across the street, yet I sensed he was lost in some memory. Out loud, he shared, those bills just kept appearing, and after a while, I couldn't keep up. He paused, and then he looked at me while slowly pounding a fist against his chest and continued, it was like this heavy feeling on me every single day. I hated it. I hated it so much. It was the worst secret. No one knew, not even my wife, that my place was going under. His hands were twisting and turning against one another. Although I had never lost a restaurant of my own, I was very familiar with the risk of the business. My restaurant experience spanned more than a decade, including many years before that day and many after. The restaurant industry, being the backbone of my dad's produce delivery business, was table chat in my home growing up. Dad would say, if you want to know how a restaurant is doing, just ask the produce guy, hey, when's the last time you got paid? Falling behind on bills happens as fast as a rug being pulled out from someone, and it's usually not because the owner is shifty or shady. It's because the risk far exceeds the reward. It takes an incredible amount of energy, equipment, and supplies to keep a restaurant going, not to mention a staff who will work 10 to 12 hours a day on your payroll. Food has an expiration and must move, but it can't if there are no customers sitting and turning over every seat in the place, and that must happen night after night for any chance of success. An establishment can roll hot for a while, sure, but a few weeks of a slow time can be devastating. And that's usually when the wheels come off, as they say. It's a common tale, sad nonetheless, because the effort from everyone involved is all heart. And I felt really sorry for that nameless guy that I met once and never forgot until the next part of his story. He buried his face in his hands and then rubbed them up and down all over the top of his head rapidly, almost scrubbed his thoughts before he let out an energetic, "Woo!" And then he continued, his hair now sticking straight up in the air. I couldn't sleep. And I looked at my wife. She was sound asleep. So I got up, got dressed, grabbed a little cash, went downstairs, and I left out the back door. The last half of my pizza lay on my lap as I barely held the crust. My other hand was now halfway up my face with my fingers resting below my widened eyes. Then, in one swoop, he ran both of his hands down across his legs, over his knees, until he extended two flat palms out, framing the street before us. He held them there for a couple of seconds before resting them back down. I got out. I did it. I just got away. I never looked back. He concluded his story, pleased as punch with himself, I guess. I stood and placed the half piece of pizza that he was now ogling back into the box and picked it up. I better get back to work, I said as I waved goodbye. The sun hid behind the clouds on my short walk back to the trading floor, and the air was meaner, sending a chill that hurried me. Right before entering my building, I stopped at a garbage can on the corner, and without hesitation, I threw that remaining pizza straight down into it. My heart aged years in that one conversation, and I fell silent that evening at home, replaying the conversation with that nameless man I met once and never forgot. As I looked up at my ceiling before falling asleep in my warm bed, the thought haunted me. He didn't face the music. He just left everyone. Over the following 20 years, I would think of him, not every day, but here and there. When I had a relationship that ended because of deceit, I pictured that nameless man's excitement over running away in the night. I imagined his wife waking up the next day to much more than his empty place on the bed. She had his financial debt to face all alone. I would get fired up and draw my own conclusions. I hope that son of a bitch's false enthusiasm got his ass kicked on the streets, and when he tried returning home, he found that she turned the whole thing around and had a thriving restaurant in his absence, with absolutely no room for him anymore in her life. Another time, when I was behind the 8 ball facing a debt of my own, I stood in my closet for a long time looking at a dusty suitcase that I had pulled down to my level. I thought, he did it with no possessions, but I bet I could get further if I filled this thing. Like, could I vanish too? When the chips were up in the game of life and everything fell into place, which happens more often depending on perspective, I've grown older and learned, I would play out an optimistic ending for that man. I bet he went home. Yeah. He walked down the street and his wife was watering flowers on the front lawn. She would block the sun with one hand and shadow a silhouette of her husband returning to her. They probably embraced for a long time right there in front of their shared home and vowed to work it all out. The truth is, I do not know what became of that nameless man I met once and never forgot. But that's how judgment works, isn't it? We all decide someone else's story based on the one we are living in. For all I know, we could have passed each other again once or multiple times on those downtown streets. His 5 o'clock shadow could have grown into a beard as long as Santa's and covered his now yellowed, tattered, and torn white t-shirt. Maybe he possessed his own cart that was filled with years' worth of papers and cans. Maybe, just maybe, there was a day he was tucked in the corner of a business storefront doorway. The excitement, once living in his eyes, now dimmed with despair as he watched people walk by. Perhaps he had a friend with him for body warmth, and he would give them a nudge to say, hey, see that gal over there? The one walking around and talking to herself. She bought me pizza once, a long time ago. This is as good a place as any to end this episode. My name is rooroosig, and I thank you for listening to The Story Chaser. Remember, there are stories everywhere. The key is to focus in on the little memories to find the bigger moments. My promise to you is that I'll keep chasing those stories. Be well, folks, and go ahead. Have a wonderful life.